thanks for coming and learning about Beyond Trauma. My name is Tammy Curtis. I am a licensed professional counselor in the state of Wisconsin. I actually have certificates in professional trauma therapy and trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy. So my passion is working with individuals who have experienced emotional trauma or psychological trauma in their life. The passion stems from growing up in the military and seeing my dad's friends and coming back from Vietnam, and some of my friends and family who were in Desert Storm coming back changed and not being able to function so much or not being able to be so controlled in society. And also my husband and I have adopted 2 kids from foster care, and I worked with the foster care system and understanding the trauma that they experience in their lives. So what you'll be learning today would be, you're going to identify trauma responses in children and adolescents. That's very important because as a community, as people in the working within systems, you're going to come across trauma responses from children. We're talking about children and adolescents that you may have to respond, but also just not respond, but how do we help build resilience in those children as they're re-experiencing the trauma. We're going to critique resilience theories. So I'm going to give you some resilience theories, and you as a group are going to critique it. And then, And then we're going to propose a theory to community leaders to help build resilience in individuals who have experienced trauma. So you're going to propose one of the critiques that you look at, one of the theories, and you're going to propose one of those to the community leaders. So what is trauma? What's your definition of trauma?
Trauma is an event or an occurrence that has happened in someone's life that fundamentally changes them in a way that they can't cope. It could be abuse, it could be an event, weather related, like an eruption of a volcano or earthquake or tornado. Anything that changes the normal flow of that person's life could be considered trauma.
Great. Anyone else want to put a response to that? No? So trauma and PTSD are both the same thing. So trauma in the medical field is a wound to a physical extremity or inside, and trauma in the mental health units are trauma to the brain, to the psyche, to the emotional stance of a human being. So trauma or PTSD is a psychiatric disorder that can occur in people who have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event such as natural disaster, a serious accident, a terrorist act, war, combat, rape, other violent personal assault. So I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to have you guys identify yourselves and tell the class how you might come in contact with someone having a trauma response.
So first, I'm Jim Curtis. I'm a pastor of a local church, and I possibly could see any day, at any given time, somebody that comes into the building or comes to a service that is dealing with some kind of traumatic event. I may see that from a pulpit, or I may see that in a personal time of prayer.
I'm Gwinnett Cook. I am a nursing student, so I often see PTSD in abuse or divorce or any type of event like that.
My name's Carl Cook, and during my profession, I visited many residences, so I came across many situations where there were domestic fights going on at the time, kids getting hurt. So just in the residences themselves, I came across quite a few of these events.
Great, thank you. So Bessel A. van der Kolk has a book called The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. It's a great book to read if you want to learn more about what goes on with an individual who is experiencing trauma or re-experiencing trauma. He has a quote that says, "Being traumatized means continuing to organize your life as if the trauma were still going on, unchanged and immutable, as every new encounter or event is contaminated by the past." So, explain in your own words what it means to live each encounter as contaminated by the past, and how does that affect an individual with a trauma past?
So for me, it would be different events in my life that occurred that weren't that were out of order. So growing up where I grew up, I understand when I go to the beach, there's sharp rocks there, there's sand and other things. But the first time I went, and that was on the West Coast, the first time I went to a East Coast beach, I encountered jellyfish, which was different. So I learned from that, so every time I go to any beach from that point forward, I always look for jellyfish, even though they may not be at the beaches that I go to.
Thank you.
What I would think of would be like the values that I have. So like that school is something that's important. So someone with a more of a trauma past probably would not emphasize school in their life.
That points to me right to, I think of marriages where you come in with your own baggage, whether it be a broken home. Just about everything you do or learn as you grow up affects what's going to come in the present. So, like I said, a broken home, siblings that are fighting, that affects how you deal with everything during your day.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think, if you are having trauma or it hasn't been resolved, the trauma hasn't been resolved, so how would that affect a child or adolescents in their everyday life?
Very guarded.
Mm-hmm.
Walls would be up.
Mm-hmm.
You may never get married. And using Carl's case, they may never get married because they don't want to go through what they observed.
Good. Thank you. So trauma, what trauma is the mechanism of unsafe. So if you've experienced trauma and hasn't been resolved, or you haven't had a protective parent or someone to help you through that trauma, you're going to walk around feeling unsafe. And our brains are not geared to be unsafe. They're really geared to, let me rephrase that. Our brains are geared to protect us. So if we are never safe, what is what part of our brain, where is our brain always going to be?
Get me safe.
To be trying
Get me safe.
get me safe. And so when our brain is constantly on guard, it actually sends hormones and makes us feel really agitated inside. So some of the symptoms are hypervigilance. Do you guys know what hypervigilance is?
Kind of.
What do you think hypervigilance is?
Always on the defense.
Mm-hmm.
Very guarded.
Yep. The body will have increased cortisol and adrenaline. So we're all when you have trauma, you're always getting ready to run. You're always ready to fight. You have sensory overload. So you hear people come into the classroom or come into the church and say it's too light or it's too much noise because their brains are just an overload already. They're walking in perceived fear. They have elevated heart rates. They feel anxious. They even have a loss of memory, sometimes even short-term memory. And they also suffer from depression a lot. So psychological trauma is an affliction of the powerless. So how does that make you feel, knowing that if someone's walking around with trauma, how does that affect your way of perceiving how behavior is?
We're probably gonna look at people different if we understand that. I mean, we may see somebody on a bench or something and think, well, that's just really weird, and they could be there because of trauma in their past, and that's a safe place for them. Anywhere else, they feel powerless, and so we may just look at everybody different.
Mm-hmm. Gwinnett, how about you in the nursing field?
This reminds me of like drug abuse, where they're seeking to gain power in any way that they can.
Yep. Good example. So, what are possible behaviors you may see in an individual who is experiencing a trauma reaction?
They may isolate themselves.
Okay.
They may be aggressive or loud.
Short temper.
Could they actually draw attention to themselves? Like defer the situation, bring comedy into it? Like I'm thinking like class clown.
Yep. Or drama.
Right. Drama, good.
Okay. In kids, what do you think you'll see? What is something that you think in the classroom that you hear about in a classroom or on a field trip?
Probably tears, a lot of tears, crying. They may do things that will cause other people to stay away. For example, they may not put on deodorant or brush their teeth. They may soil themselves, things like that, just to keep people away.
Being unclean,
Yeah.
lack of
Defense,
lack of
hygiene.
hygiene. Anything else that you can think of?
Tantrum?
So I want you to think about those behaviors as we go on, because when as we go on, we're going to be talking about resilience, and part of understanding resilience is understanding behavior, because when we respond, maybe we'll respond differently than what we would have in the past. So, in a group, discuss what negative responses from others yourself have witnessed or been part of while an individual was presenting with a trauma reaction. And share one story from the group and identify the negative actions from the individual who was responding to the trauma response. So right now we're going to pause the camera so you guys can discuss as a group, this question. now that you've gotten together in a group and discussed about certain situations where there was a trauma response from other individuals dealing with a child with trauma, what situation did you guys come up with?
One that stood out to me was Jim brought to our attention was a young man that was in and out of foster care, and he had a problem wetting himself, and they deemed the only way to remedy this was to medicate him. And as it turned out, this was really not the case. They needed to treat the trauma that he was dealing with instead of a medical issue as to cure this problem.
Great. So the young man really needed to build some resilience. The young man needed people to support him and to encourage him and maybe go back to the basics, right? To teach him how to maybe have hygiene or how to listen to their body, because the trauma that he experienced, no one taught him how to do that, right?
Correct.
Right. So our brains continually form maps of the world, maps of what is safe and what is dangerous. So in the case of the young man that you guys were talking about, what do you think maybe urinating in his pants, dependent on this, what do you think maybe was the issue?
I believe he was bullied.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he was bullied and it was a defense mechanism.
Right.
Makes sense?
Yep, it does make sense. So what was his brain doing? If our brains continually form maps of the world, maps of what is safe and what is dangerous, what was the map in his brain defining?
He needed an escape.
Which is he safe or dangerous?
I'd love to say a bit of both.
I would say that he was probably living in a dangerous world,
Yes,
and he was trying to make himself safe,
by isolating himself.
right? Good. So my class is beyond trauma, because we have to look beyond the trauma and we have to create a community of resilience, creating resilience for kids who are experiencing trauma, or even they've walked through the trauma and now they have trauma reenactments or trauma re-experiences. So, and I call it knowing I can. Because kids in trauma don't believe they can, but we need to create a community, a support system for kids to know they can, so they can become thriving adults. So resilience generally refers to a pattern of adaptation in the context of risk adversity. So resilience is not extraordinary, it's actually ordinary. Every human being has the capability of building resilience. It is learned through experience, thoughts, and actions. So it's a learned pattern. It is based on culture, so every culture is different on how they build resilience, and it is personal. So everybody's resilience is unique and different compared to another individual. So group discussion. I gave you some research papers. I want you guys to get into the group, and I want you to come up with key elements to building resilience in individuals who have experienced trauma. So I want you to look at key elements. And then I want you to share your findings with the class. Okay, after discussing your research that you came up with, what are some key elements that you came up that you could help build resilience in a child or adolescent?
One big part that we thought was included in resilience was a support system, which parents also play a large part in that. Just encouraging and showing compassion to the child. And that each case is different for each child, whether it's timing or the situation or the treatment, just how to encourage that child.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So obviously each case would be different. One could take much longer than the other.
Mm-hmm. Depending on what trauma they've gone through or what supports are in place for that.
Correct, yes.
Right. Okay, anything else that you guys want to add to this before we move on?
I just think it's a constant reminder to whoever's dealing with the trauma that they're safe.
Mm-hmm. That is.
Always let them know they're safe.
Mm-hmm. In fact, when you respond to someone who's having a trauma reaction, that's the first thing that you should try to instill is safety. So walk in. If you come in and say, I see that you're under distress, or however you would say that, and just say, right now you're safe, and let's talk about what's going on. Because if you go in and say, why are you acting this way, you're going to get an eruption, right? But if you ask what is going on and how you can help, that de-escalates the situation. So now we're going to talk about resilience theories, which is really important when you're going out, because we all have to have a theory behind how we're going to build resilience in the community, in our clients, in our patients, in our churches. We have to have a theory behind it to actually move forward. So at this time, I'm going to just go through the theories real quick, and you are going to do a little bit of research on that, and then you guys are going to propose a theory that you can propose to the community, okay? So there is 4 basic ones: the resilience theory, the compensatory model, the protective factor model, and the challenge model. So I want you to read over the research article that I presented to you, and based on that information, what would you propose to community leaders to help instill resiliency into our children in the community? Okay, as a group, what did you guys come up with to propose to the community leaders, and why you think that is going to be a good proposal, a good theory to give to the community leaders? And then what model did you not like, and give the reasons why?
So we evaluated this article from Mark Zimmerman that outlined the different theories that you had placed on the board earlier. And what we agreed as a group was the challenge model theory. And the reason that we picked that one is because it puts the individuals in an environment that is not 100% safe. There's a little bit of risk, there's a little bit of challenge, there's a little bit of opportunity for them to see success in a potentially elevating situation. And every time that they win in that environment, it's going to build their resilience. The key to this particular method, though, theory is that you can't put them in something too tough to start with. You got to build it. So you're not gonna put them in something that they're gonna fail at or not win. Otherwise, it'll create an opposite effect. They'll just not try anything. And so you have to move it into gently,
So it's helping them build resilience
Yep.
a little bit at a
a
time.
little bit at a time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about the model that you did not think was going to, that you would not propose to the community leaders, and why?
Well, the one that we identified was this compensatory model. And the big takeaway from that one was that it was counterproductive to their resilience. So if let's say an event happened, instead of encouraging them and elevating them in a positive way, they may just resort to eating more food or hiding out more. So it really was a negative in building the resilience to dealing with situations. So this is the one that we picked as the least favorable model of all of them.
I thought that the compensatory model might give them resilience to the certain situation that they're dealing with at that time, but it wouldn't actually grow them so that they'd have resilience in different situations.
That's a key word I picked up on the challenge model was we want to see some growth. That there is room for growth in the challenge model where you wouldn't have that in the compensatory model.
Good. So resilience is growth,
Yeah.
right? We don't want them to stay stuck at where they're at. We want them to thrive. We want them to grow. Great.
Correct.
So do you feel confident, like if I said, okay, we're going to take a model to New London's community leaders, would you be like, I'm on board, let's go?
Yeah.
Let's go.
Okay. So I'm going to wrap it up this session with a just summarizing, just to make sure that you guys feel that you have learned the objectives that we had placed. So do you feel that you can identify trauma responses in children and adolescents?
In most cases, yeah.
Better, yes.
Yeah.
Did you feel that you were able to critique resilience theories?
Yes.
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 And do you feel confident to propose a theory to community leaders to help build resilience in individuals who have experienced trauma?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Now I have a question for you guys. What are 2 essential products of resilience can you apply to your work, homes, and community that foster knowing I can?
Always hope. Always provide hope, I think, is key. And a positive encouragement.
I think just being aware of this now, being mindful that I would have an influence and I can do this.
Okay. So what you guys basically wrapped up is hope and optimism. So my challenge for you guys in building resilience is, even if you are in a situation, bring hope and optimism, and that will, in that time, in that place, will build one step towards resilience for kids. Thanks everybody for participating.
Thank you.